Picture this. You're the cook at a ranch in 1885, and when you try to contribute business ideas to improve cattle operations, the ranch owner humiliates you in front of 30 powerful ranchers, saying women don't understand business and should stay in the kitchen. But what he didn't know was that for months, you'd been secretly corresponding with a major investor from Chicago who was so impressed with your insights that he traveled all the way to Wyoming to offer you a partnership worth $50,000. If you want to know how I went from humiliated cook to successful ranch owner in the Wild West, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, because this story of perseverance and vindication will leave you absolutely amazed. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I've been the cook at the Broken Arrow Ranch in Wyoming Territory for 5 long years. It was September 1885, and the annual cattlemen's gathering was about to take place right here on our property. Ranch owners from across 3 counties would come together to discuss cattle routes, market prices, and investment opportunities for the coming year. As I prepared an enormous feast for over 30 ranchers, I couldn't help but listen to the conversations drifting in from the main house. These men made decisions that affected thousands of head of cattle, countless acres of grazing land, and the livelihoods of every person working these ranches. And I knew I had ideas that could help them, if only they would listen to a woman. "Sarah, make sure that beef stew doesn't burn," barked James Caldwell, the owner of the Broken Arrow. "These men expect a proper meal, not some charred mess." "Yes, sir, Mr. Caldwell," I replied, stirring the massive pot over the outdoor fire pit. But inside, I was seething. For 5 years, I'd done far more than just cook. When the ranch foreman got sick last spring, I'd managed the supply orders and coordinated with the cattle buyers in Cheyenne. When we had trouble with rustlers, I'd suggested moving the herd to the eastern pastures, advice that saved us nearly 200 head of cattle. But to James Caldwell and his guests, I was just the cook. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and I could see the dust clouds on the horizon as more ranchers arrived for the gathering. Men in their finest suits and polished boots, riding expensive horses and driving fancy carriages. They represented some of the largest cattle operations in Wyoming, Colorado, and Nebraska. "Morning, Sarah," called out Tom Baker, one of the few ranchers who actually treated me with respect. He owned a smaller spread about 20 miles north and always made a point of complimenting my cooking. "Smells like heaven over here." "Thank you, Mr. Baker. I've got fresh biscuits coming out in 10 minutes. As I worked, I overheard snippets of conversation that made my heart race with frustration. They were discussing cattle routes to the railroad in Cheyenne, the same routes I'd been analyzing in my correspondence with potential investors back east. I'd been writing detailed letters about market opportunities, efficient grazing rotations, and cost-saving measures for months now. You see, what nobody at the Broken Arrow knew was that I'd been secretly corresponding with a business investor from Chicago named E.J. Morrison. It had started when I found an advertisement in an old newspaper for investors seeking information about Western cattle operations. On a whim, I'd written a letter describing the realities of ranch life and the opportunities I saw for improvement. To my surprise, Morrison had written back asking detailed questions about cattle management, seasonal patterns, and local market conditions. Our correspondence had grown into a substantial business discussion over the past 8 months. Morrison seemed genuinely impressed with my knowledge and had hinted at potential investment opportunities. But here at the ranch, I was still just the cook who wasn't supposed to have opinions about anything beyond which cut of meat to serve for dinner. "Sarah," Caldwell's voice boomed across the yard, "bring some of that coffee to the main house, and make sure it's strong. These men have serious business to discuss." I filled a large pot with fresh coffee and carried it toward the house, my mind racing with ideas I wished I could share. As I approached the front porch where the men had gathered, I heard them debating the very issues I'd been writing about with Morrison. "The problem is the Eastern buyers don't understand the quality of our beef," said Jeremiah Hayes, who owned the largest spread in the county. "They're paying the same price for our prime cattle as they do for inferior stock from Texas. We need better marketing," added Baker. "Someone who understands both the Eastern markets and our Western operations." This was exactly what I'd been discussing with Morrison. I knew I had valuable insights, but as I set down the coffee pot, I hesitated. Should I speak up? Would they even listen? The decision was made for me when Caldwell noticed me lingering. "Sarah, you can go back to your cooking now. We don't need you eavesdropping on men's business." The dismissal stung, but I returned to my fires more determined than ever to prove that I was capable of much more than just cooking meals. As I watched the smoke rise from my cooking fires, I had no idea that before this day was over, everything would change. The business meeting officially began after lunch, with all the ranchers gathered on Caldwell's front porch. I was cleaning up the dishes when their voices grew louder, indicating some kind of disagreement. Unable to resist, I positioned myself where I could hear the discussion while appearing to work. "The cattle market is changing, gentlemen," Hayes was saying. "We can't keep doing business the same way our fathers did. We need innovation, efficiency, better record keeping." "What we need is more capital," argued another rancher. "These Eastern investors don't understand our business. They want guarantees we can't give." "Maybe the problem isn't the investors," I found myself saying before I could stop myself. "Maybe it's how we're presenting our operations to them." The sudden silence was deafening. Every man on that porch turned to stare at me, and I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment and defiance. "Excuse me?" Caldwell's voice was dangerously quiet. I took a deep breath, knowing I'd already crossed the line. I said maybe we're not presenting our operations properly to Eastern investors. They want to see detailed planning, efficient resource management, and clear profit projections. Several of the men started chuckling, but Caldwell's face was turning red with anger. "Sarah, you will return to the kitchen immediately," he commanded. "But I have ideas that could help." "Ideas?" Caldwell exploded, standing up from his chair. "You're a cook. What could you possibly know about cattle business or Eastern investors?" The other ranchers were openly laughing now, and I felt my determination crumbling under their ridicule. "James is right," laughed Hayes. "Next thing you know, she'll be wanting to attend our business meetings in Denver, or offering to negotiate with the railroad companies," added another rancher, slapping his knee. Caldwell walked toward me, his face stern and condescending. "Sarah, you make excellent biscuits and decent stew, but that's where your expertise ends. Cattle ranching is a man's business. It requires understanding of markets, finance, logistics, things that are frankly beyond a woman's comprehension." "Women have their place," agreed Baker, though he looked somewhat uncomfortable with the harsh tone. "And that place is supporting us men who make the real decisions." "Perhaps you should consider finding a husband to take care of you," suggested Hayes with a patronizing smile. "This fantasy of yours about understanding business matters is rather unseemly." I stood there, coffee pot still in my hand, feeling smaller and more humiliated than I had since my early days as an orphan looking for work. These men saw me as nothing more than a servant, incapable of contributing anything beyond domestic labor. "I apologize for speaking out of turn," I managed to say, my voice barely steady. "See that it doesn't happen again," Caldwell warned. "And if you can't remember your place, perhaps it's time to find employment elsewhere." I retreated to the kitchen area, my face burning with shame and anger. Through the window, I could see the men resuming their discussion, occasionally glancing my way and chuckling. I had never felt so belittled in my entire life, as I mechanically cleaned dishes and prepared the evening meal, their words echoed in my mind. Beyond a woman's comprehension, find a husband. Remember your place. The worst part was the certainty. In their voices, as if my gender automatically disqualified me from having valuable thoughts about anything beyond cooking and cleaning. But as the afternoon wore on, my shame began transforming into something else: determination. These men had no idea about my correspondence with Morrison, no knowledge of the business insights I'd been developing, no understanding of my capabilities beyond what they could see in their limited worldview. I thought about Morrison's latest letter, which had arrived just 2 weeks ago. He'd written about plans to expand his investments in Western cattle operations and had specifically asked for my recommendations about potential partnerships. He'd even mentioned the possibility of bringing in a Western partner who truly understood the business from the ground up. As I needed dough for the evening's bread, I made a decision. I would write to Morrison immediately and tell him about this gathering. If he was serious about investing in Western cattle operations, perhaps he needed to see firsthand how business was really conducted out here. What I didn't know was that my humiliation was about to lead to the most surprising reversal of fortune I could have imagined. Sometimes the universe has a way of delivering justice exactly when you need it most. That evening, after serving dinner and cleaning up, I retreated to my small room behind the kitchen to write what I thought might be my final letter to E.J. Morrison. By candlelight, I poured out my frustration onto paper, describing the day's humiliation and the attitudes I faced as a woman trying to contribute ideas about ranch management. Asterisk. Dear Mr. Morrison, today I witnessed firsthand the closed-minded approach that may be limiting opportunities for Eastern investors in Western cattle operations. Despite having managed significant portions of ranch logistics myself, I was dismissed and ridiculed simply for offering suggestions about improving investor relations. I fear that until these ranchers begin to value innovation and different perspectives, regardless of their source, Eastern capital will continue to be wasted on inefficient operations. Perhaps it would be beneficial for you to observe a typical ranchers' gathering to understand the challenges you might face in establishing profitable partnerships out here. The annual gathering concludes tomorrow with final discussions about cattle routes and investment needs. If you are truly serious about Western investments, seeing this environment firsthand might inform your decisions. Respectfully yours, Sarah Mitchell. Asterisk. I sealed the letter, planning to take it to town the next morning to catch the eastbound stage. But fate had other plans. I was awakened before dawn by the sound of horses and carriages arriving. Peering out my window, I saw an elegant black carriage with brass fittings pulling up to the main house. Even in the dim morning light, I could see it was far finer than any vehicle owned by local ranchers. As I started the breakfast fires, I watched a tall, well-dressed man step down from the carriage. He wore a perfectly tailored Eastern suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Behind him emerged a younger man who appeared to be an assistant or secretary. "Who's that?" I asked Tom Baker when he came by for his morning coffee. "Don't know," Baker replied, squinting at the strangers. "Mighty fancy rig, though. Must be someone important from back east." My heart began racing. Could it possibly be? Caldwell emerged from the house, clearly surprised by the unexpected arrival. I watched him greet the strangers with the exaggerated hospitality he reserved for people he thought might be important. "Gentlemen, welcome to the Broken Arrow Ranch. I'm James Caldwell, the owner. What brings you to Wyoming territory?" "I'm E.J. Morrison," replied the tall man in a clear, authoritative voice. "I believe you've heard of Morrison Enterprises?" I nearly dropped the coffee pot. E.J. Morrison, my mysterious correspondent, was here. Morrison Enterprises. Caldwell's voice shot up an octave. "Of course. The Chicago investment firm. What an honor. Please, come in, come in. Other ranchers began gathering around, sensing the presence of serious money. Morrison's reputation apparently preceded him. I could see the excitement and nervousness in their faces. Actually, Morrison said, looking around the gathering, I'm here to meet with someone specific. I understand Miss Sarah Mitchell works at this ranch. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat. Every rancher stared at Morrison as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. Sarah? Caldwell's voice cracked. Our cook? Miss Mitchell has been corresponding with me for several months about cattle investment opportunities in this region. Her insights have been remarkably astute. I stood frozen behind my cooking fire, unable to believe what I was hearing. Morrison. The E.J. Morrison of Morrison Enterprises had traveled all the way from Chicago to see me? There must be some mistake. Hayes stammered. Sarah is just ... She's our cook. She doesn't know anything about investments, or, on the contrary, Morrison interrupted smoothly. Miss Mitchell's analysis of Western cattle operations, market trends, and efficiency improvements has been the most comprehensive and practical I've encountered from anyone in this region. Caldwell's face went through several shades of red and purple. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Sarah is a fine cook, but she's just a woman who understands your business better than you do. Apparently, Morrison replied coolly. Her suggestions for improving cattle root efficiency and reducing operational costs could increase profitability by 30%. Her analysis of Eastern market demands shows a sophistication that frankly surprised my team of business analysts. I finally found my voice. Mr. Morrison, you're really here? Morrison turned toward me with a warm smile. Miss Mitchell, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I hope you received my last letter about the partnership proposal. Partnership? Caldwell's voice was barely a whisper. Oh, yes, Morrison replied, his eyes twinkling with what seemed like amusement at the men's shocked expressions. I've been looking for a Western partner who truly understands cattle operations from the ground up. Someone with practical experience, innovative thinking, and detailed knowledge of local conditions. Miss Mitchell's correspondence has convinced me she's exactly what Morrison Enterprises needs. The gathering of powerful ranchers stood in stunned silence, watching their cook being courted by one of the most successful investors in Chicago. I could hardly believe it myself, but Morrison's presence and words were undeniably real. Humiliation of yesterday was about to become the vindication of a lifetime. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Morrison stood confidently among the speechless ranchers, while I struggled to process that this powerful businessman had traveled hundreds of miles specifically to meet with me. Miss Mitchell, Morrison continued, I believe you mentioned in your letters that you have detailed knowledge of cattle roots, seasonal grazing patterns, and cost reduction strategies that could significantly improve operations throughout this region? Yes, sir, I managed to reply, my voice growing stronger. I've been tracking efficiency patterns and market opportunities for several years. Caldwell finally found his voice. Now wait just a minute. Sarah works for me. Any ideas she has about this ranch or my property? Morrison's expression grew cold. Is that so? Then perhaps you can explain why your operational costs are 40% higher than they need to be, or why you're losing money on cattle roots that could be highly profitable with proper management. What? How do you know about our operational costs? Miss Mitchell's analysis included detailed observations about waste and inefficiency across multiple ranches in this region. She identified specific problems and practical solutions that my financial team has verified could save thousands of dollars annually. Hayes stepped forward, his face red with indignation. You're telling us that our cook has been ... spying on us? Reporting our business to Eastern investors? I prefer to think of it as recognizing untapped potential, Morrison replied smoothly. Miss Mitchell wasn't spying. She was observing and thinking, which apparently is more than the rest of you have been doing. Baker, who had always been kind to me, looked confused and hurt. Sarah, is this true? You've been writing to investors about our operations? I took a deep breath, knowing this was my moment to either stand up for myself or retreat back into the shadows forever. Yes, Mr. Baker, I've been corresponding with Mr. Morrison about opportunities to improve cattle operations in this region. I've seen so much waste, so many missed opportunities, so many ways we could be more efficient and profitable. But every time I tried to offer suggestions, I was told to stay in the kitchen because women don't understand business. Well, it seems this woman understands business better than any of you, Morrison said sharply. Miss Mitchell's recommendations about cattle breeding cycles alone could increase herd productivity by 25%. Her analysis of railroad negotiations identified leverage points that could reduce shipping costs significantly. Caldwell was sputtering with rage. This is preposterous. She's just a cook. She has no education, no business experience. She has 5 years of hands-on ranch experience and a mind that sees patterns and solutions you've been blind to. Morrison interrupted. Which brings me to why I'm here. Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out an official-looking document. Miss Mitchell, Morrison Enterprises would like to offer you a partnership in a new cattle operation. We're prepared to invest $50,000 in establishing a ranch that will demonstrate proper efficiency and innovation in cattle management. $50,000. That was more money than most of these ranchers saw in 5 years. The gathered men stood in shocked silence. You would be the managing partner, Morrison continued, with full authority over daily operations and a 50% share of all profits. We believe your knowledge and approach could revolutionize cattle ranching in this region. I felt dizzy with the magnitude of what was happening. Why, oh, you want me to manage a ranch? I want you to show these gentlemen how cattle ranching should really be done, Morrison replied with a smile. Caldwell exploded. This is insane. You can't seriously be offering a partnership to a woman, a cook. I'm offering a partnership to the person who wrote the most insightful analysis of Western cattle operations I've ever read, Morrison said firmly. The fact that you've been too blind to recognize her abilities says more about your limitations than hers. Hayes tried a different approach. Mr. Morrison, surely you understand that women aren't suited for the physical demands of ranch management. The men won't take orders from a woman. The men will take orders from whoever signs their paychecks, Morrison replied dryly. And I suspect they'll be eager to work for someone who actually knows how to run an efficient operation. I looked around at the faces of the men who had dismissed and humiliated me just yesterday. Some looked angry, others confused, but a few, including Tom Baker, looked thoughtful and perhaps even impressed. Miss Mitchell, Morrison said, turning back to me. What do you say? Are you ready to show the cattle industry how things should really be done? I thought about 5 years of being dismissed, 5 years of watching inefficiencies and knowing I could do better, 5 years of being told to remember my place. Then I thought about the letters I'd written, the analysis I'd developed, and the dreams I'd never dared speak aloud. Yes, Mr. Morrison, I said, my voice clear and strong. I accept your partnership offer. Excellent. Morrison beamed. We'll establish the new operation about 20 miles east of here. The Circle M Ranch, the M standing for both Morrison and Mitchell. As Morrison and I shook hands on the deal, I caught sight of Caldwell's face. The man who had humiliated and me yesterday now looked like he'd been struck by lightning. 6 months later, the Circle M Ranch was the most profitable cattle operation in 3 counties. Word of our success spread throughout Wyoming Territory and beyond. Other ranchers began asking for consultations, and several women wrote to me asking for advice about entering the cattle business. But perhaps the sweetest moment came when James Caldwell showed up at my ranch house, hat in hand, asking if I would consider advising him on improving his operations. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell," I told him with a polite smile, "but cattle ranching is a serious business that requires understanding of markets, finance, and logistics. I'm not sure those concepts would be within your comprehension." The lesson I learned was simple. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who end up needing your help the most. And sometimes the best revenge is simply being successful enough that they have to ask for it.